Okay. Okay, I hate to break you up. I mean, it breaks my heart. So much language flying around, so many stories, but better move on. But anybody found out something about one of their classmates that you feel we all ought to know?
You did have a good weekend in Prague for his brother's stag do.
Oh, yeah? Just went across for the weekend?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Last month. How is it? Again, there's a place I've never been, but it's meant to be. Yeah. How many of you were there then?
Maybe 30.
Uh-huh. Did you dress up?
We had t-shirts on.
Uh-huh. Because it's a regular feature now. I know it's on EasyJet. You know, if you Friday night and you just hit the stag parties or the hen parties, and they're all already well tanked and dressed up. And, oh, here goes. We're not sitting with them. Had you been before to Prague?
I'd like to go back next week.
Yeah, no, I'd love to go, but choose the off season perhaps, if there is one. Good. Anything else you found out about? Lise, what did you find out?
I found out that Joanna is here. She's been here before.
Uh-huh.
For a weekend, long weekend, she liked it. And she actually lives in Italy normally. She's going back to Italy afterwards. She came to do the course because she couldn't do it in Milan. And she thought it was either a choice between Barcelona or Milton Keynes.
I think you chose wisely, I think. Not that I've got anything against Milton Keynes. Whereabouts in Italy, Joanna? Milan. Tell me, just a point of information, where is Ancona? Were you Italians?
East Coast.
Is it?
Yeah.
Because I've been invited to a conference there and I don't have and they say there's direct flights from Barcelona. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's probably with Brian
Mm-hmm.
See, all the ferries to Croatia are going.
Oh, I see. I get it. I see where it is now. Right. Good. Okay. And so we could go on and on and on. And notice that what I'm doing here, by the way, you're not language students. So I'm not doing something. Something's not happening that probably would be if you were telling your stories in English to the rest of the class, which is correction. Exactly. So I can't demonstrate that, but it's keeping that balance between responding to what you're telling me, but at the same time providing the language or changing things or not. Maybe you decide perhaps this is not the place to do that, it's not appropriate. But that would be something to bear in mind, that you would have that dilemma to resolve. Am I going to correct them? But I think the worst thing you could do is only correct them. If you're only correcting them, so somebody says, yeah, no, I had a terrible accident when I was 15, you say, good. I break my leg. No, listen, I broke my leg. Good. Anything else? That is not it's not in keeping with the kind of activity it is. Okay, what could you, thinking about that activity now, again, from a classroom point of view, what could you do to follow up? Because there's an awful lot of language here, but it's all kind of in the air. What could you do to follow it up? Okay, exactly. So that's another thing. Again, the correction issue is keeping notes of, and I think maybe not just of mistakes, but one or two nice juicy sentences, good expressions, good use of tenses of that you could also feed back at the end. Yeah. Anything else? Follow up with? got all this language flying around the room. And even, I mean, okay, again, you are proficient speakers of English, so you are, but even I've noticed with this activity, it never fails to produce, even with quite low levels, a lot of language. The problem is it's ephemeral. It's there 1 minute, it's gone the next. How do you get it back? Pardon? Exactly. And I think writing is such a good follow-up for a speaking activity because it's a way of kind of, it's sort of the language condenses on the page. All this language was just flying around and then available for some kind of study, analysis, or correction, or whatever you want. Yeah, so what could you, sorry, what's your name? Catherine. What kind of writing task could you set?
You could ask them to write perhaps 3 or 4 things they found out about the
Exactly. So exactly what you told me, they could then just write down in the form of sentences. And another thing I do quite often is I get this, after a bit of group work like that, is to say to this group, okay, now write a summary of what you were talking about for the student who's not here. There's always one. Jordi, where's Jordi? Jordi's not here. Okay, so write a summary for Jordi about what you talked about, so when Jordi comes next lesson, you can show him and hear. So that gives it a kind of purpose, not just writing things down for the sake of it. It also gives it an audience, as Jordi, and it's a kind of neat trick in a sense, because then you've got them working together, writing a summary. So I was saying, Greta said this, and Ian said that, and Katie said the other, etc. And then, of course, you've got okay, are we getting there? Ah, the weather. Okay, sorry about my handwriting. You've got the idea, yeah? Have you got 4 or 5 questions answered? Okay, now together, can you sort the questions into some kind of sequence and start writing together? One person writing, the other suggesting the story, yeah? Just get it going, get the feel of it, and then I'll stop you, yeah? So starting with, this time last year, Scott went to China. Well, it wasn't that stretchy. I mean, it was a limo. Exactly. Well, we were treated like royalty. Okay, you got the idea, yeah? I'll stop you now, but just to get the flavour of Greta, can you read us what your group's written?
This time last year, Scott went to China. He was there for 4 days at a conference with about 600 people. He got there by taking 3 flights and a long bus ride.
Now, what's interesting, thank you, that's fantastic. I mean, apart from anything else, it's all correct. The language is correct. Did I say a bus? But anyway, what's interesting is that each text is going to be different. Why? You ask different questions. But there's going to be enough similarity. So this is what's nice here. There's an inherent, intrinsic interest in hearing or reading the text of the other group. It's often easier if they read it rather than hear it read aloud. So what you do when they're written is move them around one group, and then they look and they read and find how many things that are similar and different to their own text. So there's a built-in reason for reading. And just to give you, again, the flavour of, this is one I prepared earlier. This is a group of intermediate students of mine who did the same thing. So this is, look, their little questions and their answers that I saved. And this is the text that they wrote. There's a group of intermediate teenage students here, and they even given it a title. Scott goes to a conference. Again. Last Friday, our English teacher, Scott, went to a conference in Lisbon, brackets, Portugal. The conference was about the English teaching, and it started on Friday at 2 and finished on Saturday at 5. Scott was in Lisbon from Friday afternoon to Sunday evening. On Friday night, he stayed in a hotel, but on Saturday, he spent the night with friends in their country house. The weather was gloriously hot, and he really enjoyed his stay. So that's like good text, no, for a kind of intermediate, lowish intermediate group. Now, why is it so good? Yeah, but where did it come from? I mean, why the level of the language is so good? Exactly, I wrote it. I wrote it in a sense. They had to put it in order, and they had to change everything from I to he, etc. But for expressions like the weather was gloriously hot, it's not something that students will come up with. There's a way of feeding in language, a lot of idiomatic language, that the students can then, as it were, own, yeah, and recycle in a text like this. So the text, it's a great way of kind of structuring a writing activity. And it's not usually, I mean, remember with students, these questions are not coming quite at the rate that they're coming with you because they're taking time to, and anything that, questions that arrive that's not well formed, I'll send it back or underline whatever it is that's not correct about it. But that in itself is useful material to take the questions afterwards and have a look at them and have a look at the way they're asking questions. So there's, and the other little tip I would give is if you've got a large class is have the paper different colors for different groups, because it gets really confusing as to which group belongs to which question, that kind of thing. So that's a writing activity. Okay, stop, end of activities. Are we online, Mr. Cameraman? Good. Just think back. Well, first of all, what were the activities? What was the first one? Guessing game. Yeah, guess what I had on me, and then you get, okay. What was the second one? The 5 sentences dictated, then you did the same. We talked about the stories of those. And then the third one, this writing, whatever you call it, activity, yeah. Okay, for 5 points, what have they all got in common? What features have they got in common, or what characterizes these activities?
Community.
Kirsty.
Together.
Exactly.
We all have to communicate with others too.
Exactly. And when you say communicative, not just talking, but communication's two-way. Listening. Yeah. Well, why were you listening as well as talking, do you think? Okay. Exactly. To get information. But not just any old information. Exactly. Okay. It was personal. Yeah. So I would suggest that this is information that you would rather listen to than sort of airport announcements or whatever, unless you're in an airport. Okay, so good. It was communicative and it was personalized. Good. Anything else about it? And when you say communicative, you're saying you're listening and talking to each other, and not just to each other, but who else? You. Yeah, I mean you. Me. You. So it was going all different directions. You were talking to me, I was talking to you. You were talking to each other, listening to each other, etc. So there's a lot of interaction. Yeah. Anything else about those activities? Okay, is that the title of this talk? Is it? I wasn't sure. You know. Very few materials. Good. We'll come back to just hold that one. Yeah. Anything else about it?
Nearly everything is generated by the students themselves.
Okay. True. All those stories about, you know, Katie's tattoo or Kirsty's Japanese experience or Joanna's experience, they were generated by the students in the classroom or by the teacher, but it was generated by the people in the room. Yeah, and that relates to Katie's point about there not being any materials. Anything else? Interesting? Yeah, I mean, interesting, I think, more interesting than sort of a lot of the material, things that happen in the classroom. And they're interesting and therefore perhaps, who knows, but more memorable. And if more memorable, more possibilities for learning. And there's research to suggest that where students' interest is aroused, they remember things. They remember the language that went with the story. They remember an expression like gloriously hot or whatever, because it was part of a real story about a real person. Anything else? No, I think you've covered it, yeah? I mean, interactive, communicative, personalized, engaging, interesting, memorable, and, coming back to Katie's point, there were no materials. There were no materials. There was nothing. I didn't bring in anything. I didn't bring in any photocopies. I didn't have a course book. I didn't have a reader. I didn't have a cassette. Didn't have a video. Didn't have anything except one little badge from China and a few bits of cut-up paper, yeah? So no material also means less planning. I mean, literally, this was the planning, the 5 sentences that I actually wrote while you were doing the first activity. If you didn't notice, it's on film. I had a bit of an idea what I hadn't kind of like. So no planning. Wow. This is like very different, I imagine, the kind of experience you've been having recently. Okay, so now this is it. This is the theory. My argument is, and it's an unproven one, but the fact that the activities were interactive, communicative, personalized, memorable, engaging, etc., and the fact that there were no materials is not coincidental. This is my argument. Yeah? Let's have a look. I mean, if you think of any classroom, traditionally, whatever the subject is, whether it's history or language or math or whatever, there are 3, as it were, poles, or can there be 3 poles? There's 3 axes in the classroom. There's the teacher, there's the students, and there are the materials. Typically, the course book, the textbook. Yeah? And very conventionally and traditionally, the chain of, or the direction of communication is typically mediated via the materials. In other words, the teacher, through the materials, engages the students. And classically, this would be, good morning, class. Did you have a nice weekend? Open your books, page 56. Jose, what's the answer to number 1? Yeah? So that's the, as it were, classic route. At the expense, often, I think, unfortunately, of the more direct route, which is between the teacher and the students and between the students and each other. Now, this is not to say that the materials are no good, that there should be. Just if all communication is via the materials, it seems to be a shame, particularly in a language class. It might not matter in a math class or a history class or a geography class. In a language class, it seems to be wasting a valuable opportunity for real communication between the people in the room. And that's, after all, what language was designed to do. So what I'm saying is, The danger of the kind of, as it were, the scenic route is that it can be, through the materials, it can be at the expense of direct communication between the people in the room, which is more memorable, which is more engaging, and which is real language use. That's all. So that's my thesis, and that's why. Any questions about that, or comments? I mean, there's nothing shattering about it, but it's just a kind of obsession of mine.
In fact, it's the students, because they're generous as well, they're getting what they want in terms of their own production. They're getting language they want, whether before or after. Which seems to be...
Yes, exactly. And thanks, Lisa, there's 2 points there. If you think back on those activities, there's also a great variety of different skills. I mean, there was speaking, and there was listening, but there's also, if you remember, there was, what else, other skills? There's writing, yeah, and therefore there was reading. So what I'm saying is not just talking solely about speaking, we're talking about a whole range of skills. And then coming back to Lisa's point, they are using language, well, how did you put it? Which they have, exactly. Okay, exactly. Yeah. So rather than putting words into students' mouths, which is how, in a sense, how traditional teaching goes about, particularly through the course books, today we're going to do Unit 15, it's the present perfect continuous. Okay, so I want you to make lots of sentences with the present perfect continuous.
Probably learning from each other as well. The other one is vocabulary.
It's interesting, actually. Somebody did a study in a secondary school in Algeria, I think it was, and she was interested to know what it was that the students remembered after a lesson. And that's relatively easy to research because you just watch various lessons and you record what's going on. And then after a week after or a day after, whatever, you ask the learners themselves what things came up, what topics and what language, etc., and see what they can remember. What was interesting, she found, was that in these traditional classrooms in these secondary schools in Algeria, most of the topics that came up were teacher-generated. Okay, today we're going to talk about football, or the book generated, you know. Some small amount of topics did come up, which came up spontaneously from the students. What did the students remember most after the lessons? The topics that the teacher generated, the topics that the book generated, or the topics that their colleagues generated? Their colleagues. Because these are things that, and I've found this myself when I was studying Spanish here in this Escuela Oficial, which the things that other students said made more of an impression on me in Spanish. Like, oh, God. She can do that, you know, and she's like me, and I could be able to do that too. I mean, you know, so if you're really interested in what your peers can do, it's no surprise that the teacher speaks fluent Spanish or whatever. So there's good research to back that up, that the things that the students you remember about a lesson are things that your peers, which is interesting, and it challenges the notion of kind of, you know, course books in a sense, saying today we're going to talk about whatever. Well, not necessarily. I mean, the topic can be pre-selected, and then what people say about it is what you remember. But you need to give them the opportunity to talk about the topic from their point of view. So what you need is activities which allow you to do that. And if you think about these activities, they are quite safe in the sense that, like, for example, those 5 sentences, those were deliberately chosen to bring up, okay, there were sentences about my life and then about your life, but they had language built into them. We could have spent a lot of time looking at that language. And if you're teaching the present perfect continuous, you can build in one sentence at least with the present perfect continuous. And you can insist that students make sentences with that tense. So you can kind of weight the dice, but at the same time, but the sentences that you are then using to look at the language are sentences that the students have generated, not from some book. Yeah? So again, I would argue that they are probably more memorable. They might be wrong initially, you have to sort all that out. But I mean, my particular interest in this is, and just to fill you in a little bit of background, I mean, I'm a teacher trainer here, and I work on the diploma course, which is the next step up, which you now can start saving for. In 2 or 3 years' time, you come back with lots of experience, you say, I want to upgrade. And you do the diploma course. One of the things that my colleague Neil and I have noticed here was people coming back on the diploma course, and they do the same kind of structure as this. You know, you have your input and you have teaching practice. And you'd see them coming down the corridor to the teaching practice, you know, to do a 20-minute lesson, and they're carrying a set of course books and a cassette and a video and a whole lot of photocopies and a few readers and a guitar. And, and you think, but it's only 20 minutes, Louise. She says, oh, I know, but just in case. Just in case. Just in case what? Oh, just in case I run out. And what's really interesting is that how dependent teachers, experienced teachers, still seem to be on materials. As if they're erecting a kind of edifice between themselves and the students, because it seemed to us that there was a correlation again between the lack of communicative, personalized, interactive stuff in the classroom and the amount of materials they brought, an inverse thing. And the more you bring in, the more you fill the classroom space with things and games and activities and God knows what, the less. And so we say, and she said, well, you know, what if I run out? What if I've got 10 minutes left? And I said, well, just, you know, talk to them. Oh, I couldn't do that. You might say things that are wrong, or, you know, that I should, or whatever. I said, no, it's okay. It's just human beings. You talk to people at a dinner party, you know, talk to your students. Was that allowed? Yes. That's language, you know. So what we started doing, we got quite draconian on these courses. I'm warning you. And we just said to people, look, you can't go and all that stuff. You're not allowed to photocopy. Or if you do photocopy, it has to be like one little thing, and you've got to make that last. But I don't want to see you charging your way through lots of materials. So we got this really kind of trimmed down, sort of minimalist approach going, and it really started to show off. The teaching was exciting. There was a lot of interaction, there was a lot of communication, there was a lot of teachers talking about themselves, students talking about themselves, and we felt a palpable change. So that's how I sort of got involved in this. And then coincidentally, about the same time as we were developing this, I was at a film I went to the cinema here in Barcelona and saw a film by a Danish film director. Not Lars von Trier, but a colleague of his. And look, I've even got the exhibit number 1. This is they give you these neat little things at the cinema here, so that you don't have to form an opinion, it's already formed for you. You can sort of, what did you think of? Oh, I thought it was very nice. But anyway, what was interesting about this film, has anybody seen it? Danish film, made by one of a group of filmmakers who set themselves up in 1995, called Dogma. Ring a bell? What do you know about Dogma?
I used to live with a Norwegian girl who was quite into Scandinavian films. She just talked about Dogma. I don't actually know much about it, but
Exactly. And so I didn't know much about it, but what was nice about this is they put the kind of tent. Basically what happened is Lars von Trier, he made the film with Björk, or dancing in the... Exactly. And he and his cronies got together over a bottle of red wine, apparently, one night in 1995, and decided to declare war on big-budget, Hollywood-type filmmaking. And so they wrote a manifesto, and which is what I read on the back of this flyer. And, in fact, if you go to the website, what they drew up what they called a vow of chastity. And so to make a film along these Dogma kind of lines, you had to, for example, 1, the shooting of the film must be done on location. Yeah, no big studio kind of stuff. Props and sets must not be brought in. Yeah, if a particular prop is necessary for the story, a location must be chosen where this prop is to be found. So classically, one of the, you want a flock of chickens, you can't dial up, rent a chicken. You've got to go to a place where the chickens are, and you say, if you want, and so on. Number 2 is the sound must never be produced apart from the images, or vice versa. In other words, nothing laid on afterwards or that's superimposed. Music must not be used unless it occurs where the scene is being shot. So if you want music in the film, someone's literally got to pick up a guitar and sing, and the guitar's got to be there already, kind of thing. So I thought, so this is interesting. So what they made, these really kind of in-your-face, grainy, handheld films, which are, some of them are not so good, but I thought, but they are memorable. And they are about people's, and what they were trying to do, they said it was a rescue action. They wanted to kind of restore filmmaking to anybody, and to get back to the kind of inner life of the characters. So I saw this, here's an analogy, here's a metaphor, this is the metaphor, this is what we're doing on our diploma courses. We've kind of created a kind of a Dogma style of teacher training. And so very facetiously I wrote a list of a vow of chastity for teachers. The first vow of which is, teaching should be done using only the resources that teachers and students bring to the classroom, i.e., themselves and whatever happens to be in the classroom, like, the badge or whatever. If a particular piece of material is necessary for the lesson, a location must be chosen where the material is to be found. Like a library, resource centre, the bar, the students' club, the street, or whatever. I think this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, and so on. And so, all the teachers' questions must be real questions, such as, do you like oysters, or what did you do on Saturday, and not these kind of display questions like, have I got a nose on my face, or, how many fingers have I got, that kind of thing, classic, teaching questions, and so on. So this article was published, and almost immediately I got a response from a number of people around the world saying, this is actually quite interesting, because this is what we've been trying to achieve in our school, what I've been trying to achieve as a director of studies, etc. And it was quite gratifying that people in different contexts, as far away as Korea and Australia and Scotland, said, yeah, this makes sense. We feel also that we've become over-dependent on kind of this massive amount of materials that was now available. And it's quite nice to kind of sometimes, a director of studies said he's trying to persuade his teachers that they don't have to stop teaching if the photocopier, breaks down, that they can actually go in. And teachers saying, no, it's impossible, I can't go in without photocopies. Sorry, we have to take the day off. So we started this discussion group on the web, and it just took off. I mean, slowly, and gradually gathered more and more people. And it's been very interesting hearing people's stories as they deal with this in their particular way, and lessons that they've done and suggestions they've made. And I think one of the questions that comes up constantly is, but can new teachers deal with this kind of sort of teaching? I mean, it's all very well for you. You've been teaching 25 years. You can go in and kind of wing it. But what about somebody who's doing what you're doing? Or just, could you go in and do the kind of lesson that I just did with you? What would you do if something came up that you couldn't, correct? Or didn't know why it was wrong, that kind of thing. One of the arguments is that for course books are really useful for beginning teachers, at least, because they kind of, they walk you through. And I think that's fine. You don't have to, have to worry about, oh my God, something might come up that I don't know whether they should know or how to explain or that kind of thing. That's fine. Use the course books. What I was disappointed was the fact that these people came back after 2 or 3 or 4 years out there in Mongolia or whatever, as dependent on course books as the day that we sent them off. And that's what I found disappointing. They hadn't kind of discovered that there's more to life than the course book. So I'm not saying, throw away the course books or the materials, not at all. I'm just saying that, when you come back in 3 years' time, just the guitar, just the guitar. And I remember it happened to me when I was teaching, when I first started teaching in Egypt, it was 6 months into teaching. And I sent, and in those days we were incredibly course book bound, and the students couldn't move without, we drilled them in the present simple, and then we drilled them in the past simple, and then we took them through everything very slowly, bit by bit, accumulating tenses, not allowing them to talk, because they might make mistakes. If they made mistakes, they might infect each other. And so this was really, really controlled, pre-communicative teaching. And I had a group of beginners, about 15 or 16 beginner students in this class in Egypt, mostly Egyptians, and I just sensed, you could tell in the break, that they were dying to communicate with the little bit of English that they had. So I just one day, I just thought, I'll just go and see what will happen if we don't use the course book. And I went in, and I had the cover of a magazine. That was it, a bit of blue tape. I put this up on the board, Time magazine cover, and I sat down. But I sat down with the students, and they kind of looked. And this was unusual, because those days you weren't allowed to sit down. You had to sit. So normally you'd go into a routine, who is this, what is this, where is he, no, repeat, etc., etc., etc. But I didn't. I just sat down and I waited, and they kind of looked at me, and he's lost the plot completely. And they waited, and they looked at me, and I said nothing. Just thought, nature bores a vacuum. And sure enough, somebody eventually said Saudi Arabia or whatever it was. It was a picture of the king of Saudi Arabia, I think. And somebody else said, and they looked at me, and I did nothing. And then somebody else said, very hot or whatever. And gradually, bit by bit, words started to emerge. Words, phrases, very few full sentences. But each time they emerged, they'd look at me to check, and I'd say nothing, and then gradually they realized that I wasn't going to do anything. And slowly they started as a group to collaboratively kind of reconstruct the story that was behind this particular news item. Of course, it was the latest Time magazine cover. But with their minimal English. But it was amazing. And after about 10 or 15 minutes of this, I sort of realized they would kind of run out. So I thought, what do I do now? It's that same dilemma, all this language floating around. How do you crystallize this? I mean, how do you get it back? How do you get it down? So I thought, well, you write it. So I gave one of them the pen and said, look, I'm just going to pop out for 5 minutes. Can you write a summary of the class? You're the secretary on the board of what you said. I came back in 5 minutes, and they said, no, we're not ready. And I came back, 15 minutes later, I came back, and the board was absolutely full of drivel. But it was their drivel. I mean, it was beginner's language, but it was mostly words and phrases, as I said, but it was an attempt to put it into a kind of text. And so what did I do? Well, yes, it's fantastic. Look at the language that you produced, but then what did I do with the language? Exactly. But all this, well, rather than correct it, it's kind of more like reformulating it, because correcting has a kind of negative connotation. I mean, what you're saying is, like, I know what you're trying to say, this is how I would say it. And if I'd had the sense, I would have had them write on one side of the board and kept the other side free, and then write my version of what they were trying to say in sort of, standard basic English that they could understand, which they all copied down. That was the lesson. It was a good hour. And it really taught me, that was that kind of breakthrough moment, because the two things it taught me is, one, that trust the students, because they'll, they have between them, they can, even beginners, can come up with an awful lot. And the other thing it taught me is that minimal means can create maximum effects. All it needed was that one picture and a bit of silence. And in fact, this morning, actually, I was checking the discussion site. A woman from Brazil, the last posting, the most recent posting on the site, she said, because again, people have been arguing again, is it possible to do this at new teachers to do this, to take these kind of risks? And if I can find it, she said, I've already seen experience. She's been a coordinator. This is a woman in Brazil, Brazilian woman teaching in Brazil, coordinator at a large school. I've been a coordinator doing pre and in-service for very little time, yet I've already seen experienced teachers who can't live without a book and get paralyzed the moment they lose sight of it. On the other hand, I've seen inexperienced people who can walk into a classroom with very little in their hands and come out with a bunch of happy and more confident students. And she says, it seems to me it's more about your way with people and how much you believe in their potential and in your own. And I thought that summarized actually quite nicely. There's a certain act of faith, really. It's just saying, look, I just believe, you've got to believe in them. And then run with it. Okay, any questions? Comments? Queries? Dilemmas?
Are your lessons copywritten?
Yeah, absolutely. No, not at all. I mean, not at all. In fact, in the time that you've got left for the course, I would recommend, even as just little warmers, and some of these activities are fine just for lesson starters. You don't know. But if you think about what we did today, from the very first guessing game, and we took that through, because it was deliberate, the Chinese badge and the trip to China, because that became the story that you wrote. But you could actually, with students doing that and doing those activities, occupy good, I would say, how long, Lise? 50, 60 minutes or more? Yeah. And you've generated a massive amount of language. So it's not just little warmers and games, but yes, try this one. This is just works a treat. Now, it doesn't have to be something as exotic as a trip to China. It can be your weekend, Or the dictating the 5 sentences. And so you've got a structure that you have to teach. Maybe it's would or going to what. You can insert it in one of those sentences. It doesn't have to be in every one. And then you can pull it out later. But in the meantime, you've generated a lot of language. So the students already know would or going to have had a good chance anyway to use language. And the ones who didn't, they get it kind of. So yeah, by absolutely all means. And anything else, lots of classic, traditional classroom activities. Because after all, we didn't have this surfeit of materials until relatively recently. And so teachers, especially if they're going out to places like Tanzania or Ulaanbaatar or whatever, had to be incredibly resourceful. I remember when I first started teaching in Egypt, all we had was the course book. So you had to be resourceful. Well, now we've become a little bit lazy, I think. But yeah, try some. Well, I'll give you the address for your future reference of the website. If you want to look, you don't have to be a member or anything, but you can come and look at what people are saying. It's a bit quiet at the moment because it's August, but we called it Dogma after the filmmakers, but it sounds with an E, because that's the Scandinavian way. It sounds a little bit dogmatic, but we've kind of stuck with that name. What's interesting, the Dogma group of filmmakers have since disbanded. Lars von Trier went on to kind of make Hollywood. He's just made a film with Nicole Kidman, so But they did produce for a moment. There was that kind of, and filmmaking needed it. It needed to be kind of brought back to the basics, and I think that's exactly how I feel about teaching. So I'm not saying, forget course books at all. People think, I'm anti-publishing and that. I'm not.
It's just a reality check, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rethink things again.
I think it's just reminding you that you've got people in the room. I think it's so important. They're not just empty vessels like waiting to be filled with the present perfect. They're actually real people who've got reasons to need English and want to use it. And there's good evidence to suggest that one of the best ways of learning a language is using it.
I have a question actually. We've been told that certain directors of studies in certain schools might be very forcefully adhere to the course book.
Yeah.
Use the course book.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a good idea to actually approach them with these ideas and say?
Well, I mean, there again, you see, I would put a huge kind of health warning on all this stuff, because when you go into the real world and institutions will impose, especially if you're relatively inexperienced, they're not going to have some cocky teacher coming straight off a certificate saying, I want to do it again. No, you've got to bite the bullet. There's exams, there's course books, there's parents, there's the whole, and education is founded on books and the principle of the books. You can't just throw all that out the window. I think what you can do, though, well, the nice thing about teaching is you can close the door and you can sort of do things from time to time, as I did with these students in Egypt, just take a risk and find out how far you can take it and how the students respond, because they might not like it. But no, absolutely, you are to be a professional, working professional, you've got to bite the bullet and do what you're told to do. But as you become more confident, yes, you're going to, depending on the organization, institution you're in, you can maybe start to flex your muscle a little bit and say, well, I've done a lesson where I depart.
I don't think it's incompatible.
No.
They are. You can combine them. It's looking at what you've got, but obviously not saying it's either that or it's that.
And in fact, directors of studies are over the moon if you don't use, the photocopying budget that you've been allowed. You say, oh yeah, fine, no photocopies, great. No, so I mean, there's various pros and cons, but I think always you've got to keep an eye on, you've got to do what your institution tells you, but let's just say you've got, as teachers, we do have a relative degree of flexibility, although I just heard of somebody who, in Peru in a school there, it said every school, there's a private language school, kids school, has got a computer screen on the, flat screen on the board, and the computer in the classroom, and all the teaching is programmed. So they work their way through. The teacher just points the mouse, basically, and kind of it's all programmed instruction using computer. So that there's no leeway whatsoever for any kind of teacher-student intervention, which just sounds strange. So institution is everybody's doing the same lesson on the same day, same exercise at the same minute, You think, it's reducing teachers to the level of technicians apart from anything else. So, try to avoid institutions like that if you can. Unless, you like the sound of it. You don't have to think. I mean, just one more posting. I think this sums up. A guy in Turkey, and then we'll finish. But I thought this was really good. And he was a relatively new teacher, and he was teaching big classes. Another question is coming: how can you do this with big classes? And he said, on Friday I read Scott's article in the January edition of the Modern English Teacher, who had written an article about this. My weekend students have an exam next week in which they have to write an informal letter. Informal letter, yeah? This is how the lesson went. Stage 1. Get students to look at the sample letter in the course book, and then we analyze the language and style together. Yeah, classic. So there's 3 minutes. Stage 2. Group discussing informal letters, noting how even informal letters conform to certain conditions, e.g. always ask how one is at the beginning, etc. 1 minute. Stage 3. I thought, what the bloody hell am I doing? 2 seconds. Stage 4, I opened my diary and found an email from my brother-in-law, ran to the photocopy room, ran back out of breath, then we looked at a real informal letter together. Yeah? No longer the course book, his real letter from his brother to him that he just happened to have on him. Found object. Yeah, he had to photocopy it. But again, noting the style, content, etc. in pairs and as a group. I wasn't looking at the time at this point. Stage 5, students wrote letters to me for their homework. The result, yesterday I received 18 of the most wonderful, genuine, honest pieces of writing that I've ever seen, expressing thoughts about the course, their families, their love lives, etc. In other words, because it's triggered by a real letter, you're going to get real letters in response. And he says, real people writing about real things. What did I learn or remember from this experience? 1, keep it real. 2, humanity is wonderful and we have the best job in the world. 3, give and you shall receive. Pete. So I mean that sums up, I think, the spirit of it in a sense, is that, keep it real. Keep it real. Okay, thanks very much for your time and being part of this filming experience. It's been very good. And good luck for the rest of the course. And we'll see you around. Yeah? Maybe see you on the website. Okay. Time for lunch? Thanks, Lisa.
I think it's pink. That's the one that you had out, Paul. You should take out that. Oh, no, it's not pink. No, you got the wrong one. You got the expanded lesson model. You should have the basic lesson model. That's that one there.
Lesson model, send
Yep.
lesson plan. This one here?
TP basic lesson model. Yep. And this is kind of an outline for a lesson plan. It's not as complete as I want you to make it. And you'll notice also that it's an older edition. This one only has behavioral objectives. It does not have terminal objectives and enabling objectives.
Dave,
Yeah?
do they have, or is there like on the computer, one of these lesson plans, as a template?
No, there's not, and I don't want you to write it on the computer. I want you to handwrite it, sorry. And I know, I struggle with my own handwriting. There is a method in the madness here. There is at least some portion of the education establishment out there that believes that it's important that teachers should be able to write by hand. And so I think it's worth doing for that reason. The second reason is it's actually easier to do this. Well, that's not, that would be, I suppose, too much of a subjective statement. For the most part, it's easier to do it if you do it by hand, because it offers, it's actually not too easy to move around in the columns and to do the spacing that's required when it's on the computer. If it were set up in Excel, that would solve that problem. But however, to do this in Word, it would not be easy to move around within the document, or as easy for most people. My biggest problem, however, is not that one. There was a time when we did say that completing this stuff on the computer was an option. But I have two very practical problems. Number one, we don't have enough computer capacity to allow everyone to do it. So it would be kind of unfair in a way if we said, because then everybody's running down to the computer, we don't have the capacity to do it. Number two, after allowing people to use the computer for a couple of years, I found people changing things. They wouldn't do, in effect, it like that. I'd end up with some other form. Now this form, there's a kind of a method to the madness here. There's a reason why doing it on that form. And what I found was that people would change the form. They would just come up with something that suited them better, which is fine. When you leave here, you can do that. You get the rest of your life to play around with it. But while you're here at least, we want you to use this lesson plan because it is a training model. It's used for training. You would not use this lesson plan for real-time teaching. It's to try to break things down. Now, basically, the way it works is this. Objectives. I'll start over here with lesson plan. What I'm trying to get you to do is to think through and articulate in detail your lesson. I'm trying to get you to think it through very, very carefully and articulate it in great detail. I'm trying to get you to describe the lesson in clear stages. I'm trying to get you to go through the planning process four times. From four different perspectives. Those perspectives being specifically objectives. Okay? Teacher does. Students do. Timing and problems. You got it. Questions? Is that understandable? This is a training process, ladies and gentlemen. This is not something for you to do in real time. Doing it in this way at least gives some possibility that when you are out there teaching, that you will, in effect, unconsciously do this. How long do you normally have to plan a lesson in real-time teaching? Give a shot, Rick. We'll give the people who've been out there, at least I know have been out there. Rick, how long do you have to plan a lesson?
Normally for me 30 minutes to an hour.
30 minutes to an hour per lesson? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. If you have that amount of time, then you are truly somewhat blessed to have a job that will allow you that much time. How much time do you have? What's the matter? My head was in a way that's not transparent? God, I can understand that.
You have all night.
Let's. Sorry?
You have all night before to do the lesson plan. As much time as you need.
What do you say, Tanya? Do you spend all night before doing your lesson plans?
Oh, yeah.
How much time do you spend preparing for one class?
Now,
Come on, be honest. It's okay.
about 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes? Anybody else want to give it a shot here?
Same. I mean, at first it was quite a bit.
Yeah,
These
yeah,
days it's
exactly.
10 minutes? 10 to 15 minutes? Yeah.
First it wasn't bad.
Okay. You know, time will be upon you here, where you either don't have the time or you probably won't take the time. But again, that's what you're paying for us to help you think through this process more carefully, with the idea that it will become more unconscious to you. Now, let me put it this way. Except for nagging Dave, that's me, by the way, nagging Dave, you know, you probably can get through this thing by basically writing a similar lesson plan every time. Kind of, I see people with, they got lesson plan from yesterday here, lesson plan from here today, just kind of going, sure, go ahead, do it. It's all right, you're wasting your time and your money, not mine. So there's nothing between you and doing that except nagging Dave. And again, this is one of the things you're paying me to do. If you were doing this on your own, well, maybe you wouldn't go to this much trouble. I promise you it will, how do I say, reap benefits for